We don't need electricity. Minus the last 100 years, humanity has survived without it since the dawn of time. The truth is, we've forgotten how to live without it, and we've also become accustomed to the conveniences it provides. Fortunate for us, technology also provides methods for us to generate our own electricity. Lots of folks look to alternative energy for various reasons. Some do so to offset electric bills. Some choose to do so for environmental reasons, but preppers do it for control and self-reliance. In my case, I look to solar to provide my grid-down needs. The Tin Hat Ranch solar system isn't designed to offset my electric bill, nor is it designed to replace all of my electrical wants in a normal world. It's designed to provide the power to maintain a lifestyle of reasonable convenience should the grid go down for a day, a week, or forever. A do-it-yourself off-grid solar system can be somewhat intimidating. In reality, it's composed of 5 components. Solar panels to generate the power, a charge controller to charge the batteries to store the energy, the inverter to provide AC to the household items you wish to power, and lastly, lots and lots of questions. The purpose of this video series is to answer the questions. For the rest of the components, we turn to a company called Renogy. The Tin Hat Ranch off-grid solar system is typical of the type of system you might look for your grid-down needs, as well as a typical off-grid cabin system. From Renogy, we chose 4 100-watt monocrystalline panels, a 40-amp MPPT charge controller, a 1,000-watt pure sine wave inverter, and to store the energy, we went to Batteries Plus for 4 6-volt golf cart batteries totaling 470 amp hours. Don't worry about all that jargon now. You'll learn what it means in the rest of the series. For now, just note that there's links below in the description to all the products used, as well as a link to the complete list of parts and a schematic, amongst other information. The first question I'm betting on everybody's mind is, what'll a system like this run? But before I answer that question, let me put things in a bit of perspective. The average American household uses 30 kilowatts of electricity every day. If you were to attempt to replace that usage and looked at the cost, for most of us, it would be financially unattainable. But as I mentioned before, that's not the point of a system like this. In my area, the 4 100-watt Renogy panels that I chose will provide me with about 1.5 kilowatts of power per day. While that's only about 5% of what the average American household uses, it's more than enough to run the things I need to maintain a semblance of my lifestyle if the grid should go down. I can have a freezer, power lighting, pump water, maintain communications, use tools, and charge every little device I have from flashlights to Kindles. I can also maintain some of the simple pleasures in life, have a movie night with popcorn, and even brew a pot or 2 of coffee. I'd bet that most folks don't flip on a light switch and take a mental note of how much power they're spending, but that's the key to relying on solar in a grid-down world. In today's world, most people don't consider how much power they use. They don't quantify it. Why? Because they don't have to. You can keep plugging things in and it doesn't matter. There's no consequences, except maybe a little increase in your electric bill. But the electric bill consists of a smaller and smaller portion of people's income. In a grid-down solar power world, things will be very different. Not only will you have to understand the power that you're using, but you're going to have to treat it like your bank account. You can only make so much power every day, store so much power every day, and you can never spend more than you make. Thinking about solar power like money is a good way to look at things. We can talk watts, amps, and volts all day long, and I can actually see your eyes rolling in the back of your head there through the camera. But if we talk about it like it's money, everybody can understand that. You're going to need to assess your situation to understand what you need for your off-grid solar system. Assessing your situation is a critical step in the leap towards solar, and I found the best tool to assess your electrical needs is the kilowatt meter. The kilowatt meter measures 2 things you have to know: how much energy your devices draw at any given moment, and how much power they consume over time. I've got a link in the description below to the meter. Even if you don't move forward with a solar system, this meter can work wonders in showing you where you can save big money on your electric bill, and at less than $20, it's a no-brainer. Let's take a look at this chest freezer to show you how the kilowatt meter works. The device itself is very simple. It goes in line with whatever you're testing. Simply plug it in, press the watts button, and it shows you the instantaneous draw of whatever it is that is plugged in. This freezer draws around 80 watts of instantaneous power. If I leave it on for an hour, it consumes 80 watt-hours of energy. You may have noticed that devices like freezers don't run continuously, and that's where the second function of the kilowatt meter comes in handy. It measures electrical usage over time. Leaving this freezer plugged in for 24 hours shows that it consumes 840 watt-hours of energy per day. Keep in mind that not all devices are on all the time. Take this LED light bulb, for instance. This LED light bulb draws about 7 watts. If you leave it on for an hour, it draws 7 watt-hours of energy. If you figure that you're going to need this light bulb for 4 hours a day on average, put it down for 28 watt-hours of energy. Need 10 of them? It's 280 watt-hours. Continue to use the kilowatt meter to measure the electrical consumption on every device that you feel that you should need should the grid go down. Now, there's some devices that you can't plug into the kilowatt meter. For those, we've included a worksheet in the description below on how to estimate the electrical consumption of things like pumps and blowers and things that are hardwired. Lastly, you're going to have to figure out how many of the devices you're going to want to run at the same time. This will determine the size of your inverter. The inverter's function is to take DC power from the batteries and convert it to AC power for use with household appliances. I have a 1,000-watt inverter. This means I can run up to 1,000 watts worth of devices at the same time. In the example of the freezer, we're talking about 85 watts. This coffee pot takes about 800 watts. The 4 LED light bulbs we talked about earlier would take 28 watts. That's about 900 watts of power, or just under the limit of the inverter. Once you've evaluated every device that you feel that you're going to need should the grid go down, you're going to have a good idea of how much power you need to generate each day. It's as simple as adding the watt hours together. Unfortunately, with solar, there's one more factor you have to contend with, and it's determined by where you live. And that is the number of sun hours that you're going to get on average every day. And this is where a company like Renogy can come into play. You see, the amount of power your panels will generate is determined by the number of sun hours on average your area receives. I figured that I would need about 1 kilowatt of power each day to run the essentials. As I mentioned earlier, my area receives around 4.2 hours of sun on average every day. Now, I could generate the needed amount of power with 300-watt panels. Again, simple math, 300 watts times 4.2 equals a bit over 1,200 watt-hours. A person in the desert Southwest might get 7, 8, or even 9 hours a day. It's almost possible for a person in California, Arizona, or Nevada to generate 1,000 watts with a single 100-watt panel per day. If you're an astute viewer of the Tin Hat Ranch, and we all know everybody who watches the Tin Hat Ranch is an astute viewer, you'll notice that I said I have 4 panels and not 3. This is because I want to quickly be able to recharge my batteries and have a margin for error after cloudy days and in the winter. As far as solar systems go, our grid down system is pretty small, so adding a panel or two to your system is not going to break the budget. I'd recommend that you do the same. Once you've determined how much energy you need to generate, give Renogy a call and tell them your location, or your approximate location. And they will help you size your system. Whenever we do something like this at the Tin Hat Ranch, we try to find vendors that are best in class. And in the case of a small to medium-sized off-grid solar system, Renogy is one of the best. There's links below in the description to get a hold of Renogy. For most of us, an off-grid solar system means generating power via 21st century technology and storing it in lead-acid batteries, which have their roots centuries ago. Now, while lead-acid batteries have many drawbacks, they do have a positive attribute. They're the cheapest way to store energy. They're not the lightest, they're not the most forgiving, they're not the most efficient, but we can afford them. In the first video, we introduced you into the concept of thinking of solar power like it's money. And the first general rule is you can only spend what you make. But batteries introduce 2 more rules into the equation. You can only save so much, and you can never spend all that you save. You see, energy is generally not used directly from the panels. It's first stored in the battery. You can generate all the power that you want, but if you don't have anywhere to send it and you don't use it on demand, the energy is simply wasted. So you can only store as much power as you have battery capacity. The Tin Hat Ranch battery bank consists of 4 6-volt Duracell SLI-GC 125 golf cart batteries from Batteries Plus. We chose golf cart batteries for good reason. Think of them as entry-level solar batteries. Now, the batteries that you might be most familiar with, car batteries, are truly the wrong choice to store and utilize energy from a solar system. Car batteries are designed to deliver massive amounts of energy in a very short period of time and then recharge slowly. Golf cart batteries are designed to deliver a lower amount of power over a longer period of time and then recharge quickly. Car batteries compared to golf cart batteries are very poor at delivering lower current for longer periods of time, such as running appliances or lights overnight. While a car battery would technically work in a solar system, the golf cart battery is far more suited to the application. It's for these reasons that even if you think you're saving money with the car battery, the golf cart battery is going to deliver more energy per dollar and last longer to boot. We chose to size our grid down battery bank at 12 volts, and while it's true a 24 or 48 volt battery bank might be more efficient, the 12 volt is more economical. Wait, a little light might have just gone off in your head. A 12 volt system with 6 volt batteries? I'd appreciate it if all you electrical geniuses would pipe down for just a second. Yes, by connecting 2 6-volt batteries in series, we make a single 12-volt battery. When you take 2 batteries and connect one of the positive terminals to one of the negative terminals, and then you draw your power from the remaining 2 terminals, you've made a 12-volt battery out of 2 6-volt batteries. Each battery is rated at 235 amp hours in our case, but in series, both batteries together are still only 235 amp hours, but now at 12 volts. This is because an amp at 12 volts is double the energy of an amp at 6 volts. In our system, because we want the end result to be 12 volts, we take the other 2 batteries and make them into a series as well. Then we connect the 2 series together by connecting the 2 remaining positives together as well as the 2 remaining negatives. When we connect the 2 sets of batteries together, we double the amperage. What we end up with is a 12-volt battery bank with a 470 amp hour capacity. In effect, we've created a parallel string of 2 12-volt batteries. 2 other possible battery configurations are 24 and 48 volts, and the prime advantage of going with 24 or 48 volts is efficiency. It's much easier to go from 24 or 48 volts to 120 AC in the inverter than it is to go all the way from 12 volts to 120 volts. But for a small grid-down system like ours, 12 volts is just fine because it's much more cost-effective. Even so, our 4 6-volt batteries could be wired for 24 volts simply by connecting them all in series like this. To get 48 volts, we would need a total of 8 6-volt batteries in series. We've been talking about everything in watts up to this point. In the first video, we referred to everything in watt hours, and now we're talking amp hours. Well, to convert amp hours to watt hours, we're going to take the voltage, which is 12, and multiply it by the amp hours, which is 470, and we're going to come up with 5,640. Then we're going to take that number, multiply it by about 85% to account for some of the losses you get in the inverter, and what we end up with is 4,800 watt hours. Now you would think if this chest freezer consumes 800 watt hours of energy a day, I'd have 6 days of backup. Unfortunately, that's not true. And this is where you run into the second rule of batteries. You can never spend all that you make. We're using 6-volt flooded lead-acid golf cart batteries, in essence, centuries-old technology. One of the drawbacks of lead-acid batteries is you should never discharge them below 50% capacity. If you do, you will severely limit the life of the batteries. In fact, the less you cycle the batteries, the longer they last. If you ever totally drain a battery, you run the risk of killing it. So, what on the surface looks like a 4,800 watt-hour battery bank is actually a 2,400 watt-hour battery bank. You only get half of what you buy. In the first video, I told you I needed 1,000 watt-hours of energy a day to supply my critical grid down needs. This would give me around 2.5 days backup with the 4 batteries I have. This is a minimal ability to weather a few cloudy days. And remember, your panels will still be generating some energy even on overcast days. On paper, this looks like a 2.5 day backup with my system, but in reality, I've had it last 5 or 6 overcast days in a row with some careful use of power. On the flip side, you may not want to size your battery bank much more than 5 times what you plan to use each day. With too much capacity, you could dig yourself into a hole where your panels have a hard time fully charging the batteries in each cycle. As I mentioned in the first video, we chose to work with Batteries Plus for 2 simple reasons. First, this particular Duracell battery fits the needs of a system of this size, and they carry them at a decent price, about $125 each. Second, pretty much forget about shipping batteries. They're very heavy, they're considered hazardous materials, and shipping costs would exceed the cost of the batteries in most cases. Batteries Plus has locations across the U.S., so these particular batteries can be picked up locally by you folks watching. If you live in an area where solar is more prevalent, then you may have many more choices. But Battery Plus is nationwide, and this particular battery will work for anyone, and it's within driving distance for just about anybody watching this show in the U.S. So, to recap, when sizing your battery bank, use, as a rule, a minimum of 2 days, but not much more than 5, and get as much capacity up to that 5 days as your budget will allow. Even though my system's sized at only 2.5 times what I consume, I've gone 5 or more overcast days in a row. Now this is partially due to me sizing the generating side at 1.5 times what I need as well. There are many other nuances and details you need to know about batteries, and we'll cover everything you need to know, both about the batteries, the box, and everything in it, on it, and tied to it in a future part of the series. Obviously, you're going to have to install your solar system in an area that receives full sun for most of the day, but it's a bit more nuanced than that, especially if you install a smaller off-grid system like ours. There's going to be 2 things that you're going to have to know. First, the sun isn't at the same elevation throughout the year. And second, you're going to want to try to locate your panels as close to the batteries as possible. When picking a spot to locate your panels, you have to consider that the sun will be lower towards the horizon in the winter and closer to directly overhead in the summer. While later in the video, I'll suggest that you need to tilt your panels as well. For now, know that you must locate a spot that will be in full sun throughout the year. How do you know where the sun will be in your location? There's a link to a calculator down below in the description. In my case, up north, the sun dips to just 24 degrees above the horizon in the dead of winter, but it rises to 72 degrees above the horizon in the middle of summer. You'll have to determine your range and make sure that your panels have an unobstructed view of the sky. You might think that I'm on this roof because I'm about to tell you it's the perfect spot to mount your solar panels. While roofs are good for antennas and for folks that have more money than they know what to do with, it might not be the ideal spot to mount your solar panels. The first thing you have to consider is the age of your roof. A panel like a Renogy is going to last you a good 25 years, about the same lifespan as this roof. How old's your roof? Unless your roof is brand new, you'll be removing your system at some point to repair the roof. I guess if the grid went down tomorrow, it wouldn't matter, but there's 2 more reasons you might want to consider otherwise, and both have to do with efficiency. While it's possible to get a tilt system for a roof mount, it will entail you climbing up on the roof to tilt the panels. Most roof pitches point the panels towards the sun at an angle that favors summer power generation. If you can easily walk on your roof, this is the case. When winter hits and the sun moves lower in the sky, output will be drastically reduced if you can't point the panels towards the sun. For quite a few of us, we get snow in the winter, which causes 2 problems. First, you can't get to the panels to tilt them, and second, it kills power generation when they get covered. If you can't easily clean them off, you've effectively killed your winter power generation. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't mount your solar panels on the roof. What I am saying is to consider these challenges if it's the only place that you have to mount them. In my case, I decided to make a frame that would put them about 8 feet up in the air and give them an unobstructed view of the sky no matter what time of year. It also serves a second function as the rec yard for the chicken prison. Building a system that actually tracks the sun would be best, as the panels are always pointed directly at the sun. But this being a budget build, and also out of my budget, maybe we'll have to save that for a future video. Now you can use whatever you want to mount your panels, from treated 2x4s to junk laying around the house. In my case, I built the frames out of Unistrut. Unistrut is available at any home improvement store, usually in the electrical section. It's sturdy, inexpensive, and the holes just so happen to line up with the Renogy Z brackets, so I didn't even have to bring out the drill. For the tilting mechanism, I use screw hooks and gate straps. I got those from my local Menards. Using my mounting system, I can adjust the panels tilt once a month to ensure they're pointed directly at the sun. All I have to do is remove this bolt and adjust as necessary. Your second major consideration in locating and mounting your solar panels is their proximity to the batteries. While the rule of thumb is to get them as close as possible to the batteries, this isn't always the case. And this is due to the fact that solar systems use low voltage electricity. You see, the more and more power that you try and transmit at a low voltage, the thicker and thicker the cabling must be. And this can get very costly. The problem is it's very nuanced, but there's many tips and tricks that we can employ to get around some of these limitations. But at this point, we're ready to start wiring stuff together. Once you have your panels selected and have picked a place to mount them, you're going to have to get the power from the panels to the batteries. In the last video, we said that mounting your panels as close as possible to the batteries was important. This is due to a simple electrical principle that as electricity travels down a wire, it loses energy due to resistance. The longer your wire run, the more energy is wasted due to resistance. This principle plays an especially important role in solar electricity because the lower the voltage, the more we have to deal with this phenomena. And as far as solar power is concerned, it's pretty low voltage. Resistance in the wire is directly related to the thickness of the wire. The thicker the wire, or the lower the gauge, the less resistance in the wire. Theoretically, we could mount our solar panels as far away as we wanted to from the batteries, but the wire gauge in between would have to be so thick that it would be impractical. Ultimately speaking, it's the cost of the wire that limits us from mounting our solar panels wherever we want. At this point in the series, many of you watching are designing and planning your own off-grid solar systems. And due to your differing needs, you're going to come up with different configurations, different number of panels, and so on. Now, I can't go through every scenario that's out there, but what I can do is show you the different configurations that I faced and show you how I wired my system. At this point in the series, you know that our system contains 4 100-watt Renogy panels. If your system consists of more than one solar panel, you're going to have to make a choice in wiring. You're going to have to wire the panels together somehow to transmit the power from the panels to the batteries. And just like in our battery video, you're going to have to make a choice between series and parallel wiring. Each one of these Renogy 100-watt panels generates 18.9 volts and 5.29 amps under full sun. Multiply those two numbers together and you come up with the 100 watts listed. If I were to take my 4 panels and wire them in parallel, that's bringing all of the positives to one point and all of the negatives to one point, and then measure the output, I'd end up with 18.9 volts and 21.16 amps. Multiply 18.9 times 21.16 together, and you get roughly 400 watts. This is because in a parallel system, you add the amperage together and the voltage stays the same. Conversely, if I were to wire them in series, taking the positive of each panel and connecting it to the negative of each panel, and then taking my reading from the 2 remaining positives and negatives, I'd get a reading of 75.6 volts at 5.29 amps. Multiplying these two numbers together, again, gives me roughly 400 watts. This is because in series, we add the voltage together and the amperage stays the same. So, as you can see, wiring the panels either way comes up with the same 400 watts, but with 2 very different results for volts and amps. Now, I'm not going to tell you which way is best per se. What I am going to do is show you what happens when you wire the panels either way, and then let you make the decision. Let's take a look at my situation and how wiring the panels either way would affect my decisions. When locating my panels, the sun and spousal zoning ordinances dictated the closest I could get my panels to the batteries was about 60 feet. While you should try and get your panels closer than this, many of you might find yourself in the predicament I faced. If I chose to wire my panels in parallel, I would have to first understand what happens to the power as it traverses the 60 feet. Wait! A question might have popped into your head. Why are the panels 18.9 volts? I thought this was a 12-volt system. Good question. Well, in reality, to charge a battery, you're going to need to produce about 14.4 volts. And a fully charged battery isn't even really a 12-volt battery, it's a 12.7-volt battery. You also have to keep in mind that you're going to lose voltage due to resistance over the wire. So if you start out with 18.9 volts, you should end up with 14.4 volts or higher when you get to the batteries. And lastly, you have to keep in mind that the panels aren't generating full voltage unless they're under full sun. I'm going to have to select the proper gauge wire to transmit the power from the panels to the batteries. And that's going to involve you knowing two things. First, a particular wire gauge can handle only so much power or amperage. And second, each wire is going to realize a different loss over that distance. The thinner the wire, the more the loss. There's a calculator in the description below so you can apply it to your situation, but we're going to have a look at our case. I need to transmit my power at 18.9 volts at 21 amps over a distance of 60 feet and still end up with enough voltage at the end to charge my batteries as efficiently as possible. A quick look at this table reveals that our 21 amps can be safely transmitted via 10 gauge wire, but that's only half the story. As I mentioned, the thinner the wire, the more losses will be incurred to resistance. Let's take a look at how much power we lose to resistance with this calculator using 10 gauge wire. There's a link to it in the description below. Entering in our starting voltage, wire gauge, amps, and the distance, we see that we lose almost 2.5 volts over the 60 feet. To put this in perspective, losing 2.5 volts, we go from the possibility of storing 400 watts an hour to 346 watts an hour. Keep in mind, the panels only generate full voltage in direct sun as well. If we choose 10 gauge wire to transmit the power, we'd lose 54 watts to resistance in the wire alone. While we can use 10 gauge wire, it's not very efficient at all. To deliver more wattage to the batteries, we would need to increase the thickness of the wire. If we went all the way down to 3 gauge wire and reran the calculations, you'll see that we deliver 18.4 volts to the batteries, a loss of only half a volt and 10 watts. Now, 3 gauge wire is pretty expensive. If you go to the local home improvement store, you can get it, but it's probably going to cost you a couple bucks a foot. Now, you can choose to use heavy gauge wire like this, or you can look at your second option, and that's wiring your panels in series. Remember, when you wire in series, you add the voltage together while the amperage remains the same. In my example, it was 75.6 volts at 5.29 amps. Referring to the chart, I see that 5 amps can use a very small gauge wire. This is how I wired my panels, and to traverse the 60 feet, I chose 12 gauge direct burial wire. Running these numbers through the calculator, it shows that my voltage dropped only by a single volt. This is because the higher the voltage, the less loss you experience to resistance. And even in a small off-grid system like this, the differences in efficiency are pretty remarkable. Stepping up the voltage is a principle that's in practice every day all around us. In your home, you typically use 120 volts of AC power, but the power companies will step up that voltage to tens and even hundreds of thousands of volts to transmit it for the very same reason we might do the same in a small solar system, to lose less energy to resistance and to save money on wire. If you can locate your panels within 10 or 20 feet of the batteries, it really doesn't matter if you wire them in series or parallel. But if you have a large system or your panels are a considerable distance from the batteries, you may want to consider stepping up the voltage. Even so, you might be asking yourself, why wouldn't every system be wired in series? And that brings us to the next part of the do-it-yourself off-grid solar series, the charge controller. I keep saying panels to batteries, but in reality, in between the panels and the batteries is the charge controller. And the charge controller does exactly what its name implies. It controls the charging of the batteries. And the charge controller brings us a few more options and choices, so stay tuned. The charge controller does exactly as its name implies. It controls the charge of the batteries. It makes sure that the batteries get the proper voltage that they need and that they don't get overcharged. In a small off-grid solar system like this, you're going to have a choice between two different types of controllers, the PWM controller and the MPPT controller. The first type of controller is called a PWM controller. Like this 30 amp PWM controller from Renogy, this type of charge controller is basically a sophisticated voltage regulator that takes the incoming voltage from your panels and changes it to what your batteries need. A controller like this has a couple of good attributes. They're small, simple, and inexpensive. This particular controller is less than $30 from Renogy. For simple systems, you can't go wrong with a PWM controller. If you have a single panel or a couple of panels mounted very close by, these are perfect. In fact, getting your feet wet in solar can be pretty inexpensive. You can get a single 100-watt panel and controller for less than $200, and that'll get you charging something. They're simply the only choice for very small systems. But as I mentioned, this is a 30-amp controller, so its power handling capabilities are limited. Take, for instance, our example of 4 100-watt Renogy panels from the last video. The open circuit amperage of those panels would be 23 amps. Charge controllers are rated in open circuit amperage, of which you should never exceed 80%. So 30 amps times 80% equals 24 amps. These 4 100-watt panels put the charge controller at its limit. In a 12-volt system, this PWM charge controller only accepts a 12-volt input, and that is the second limitation of the PWM controller. If you watched the last video in wiring the panels, a little light might have just gone off in your head, and you might have noticed that I can't use the PWM controller if I wire my panels in series. And that's because I have 75 volts to deal with. In this, you would be correct. And that is where the MPPT controller comes into play. When faced with your decision to purchase a charge controller, you're going to notice two things that people don't ever really explain very well. And I'm going to give it a try. The first are claims of efficiency. The PWM controllers claim around an 80% efficiency, while the MPPT controllers can claim efficiencies into the high 90s. Second, you'll notice that the cost increases exponentially between a PWM controller and an MPPT controller. This charge controller is $30. This one is well over $200. And that might be a deal breaker right there. But hold on, you need to understand a few things about the MPPT charge controller before you make your decision. As I just mentioned, the PWM controller must accept near 12 volts in a 12-volt system like ours. That stops me from wiring my panels in series because I'd have a 75-volt input. The first major advantage of an MPPT charge controller over the PWM is it can accept a much higher voltage. In the case of this Renogy 40-amp controller, up to 100 volts. This means I can wire my panels in series and take advantage of two things. First, the transmission of the power is far more efficient. More importantly, I can use thinner, cheaper wire. In my case, wiring the panel 60 feet away from the controller, I was able to save enough in the wiring alone to nearly pay for the cost difference between the PWM and the MPPT. For me, it's a no-brainer. For the same overall cost, I can gain efficiency. As I said, the efficiency that the spec sheets speak of is never adequately explained. Kicking up the voltage saves some in transmission losses, but the rest of the magic, as they say, is in the math. You see, right as the sun peaks over the horizon, your panels start generating voltage. This voltage might be a meager, say 4 or so volts. If you had wired your system in parallel and connected them to a PWM controller, this power wouldn't equal the 13 or 14 volts necessary to charge a battery. In short, the power is wasted. But in a series system connected to an MPPT charge controller, the voltage, well, it adds up, literally. 4 panels at 4 volts deliver 16 volts, or enough to begin charging the batteries. Granted, the amperage might be low, but your batteries begin charging the moment the sun peaks over the horizon. An MPPT charge controller can charge your batteries nearly the entire time the sun is out. The PWM has to wait until the voltage necessary to charge the batteries is generated. This is where the bulk of the efficiency is made up. In closing, when making a decision between a PWM and an MPPT charge controller, note that there's no real advantage with going to an MPPT charge controller in a single panel system. If you have multiple panels, then you have to weigh the cost versus the benefits. If you want more efficiency, if your panels are far away and you want to save money in wiring, then the MPPT might be right for you. Once the power hits the controller, it heads down to the batteries. In the next video, we're going to take a look at storing the power and the battery box. In this part, we're going to talk about the battery box and solar safety, both of which are intricately intertwined. Wait, I know I said the S word, just don't turn off the video. Stick around. I got a puppet! Hey, short hairs.
Hi, T.
Seriously. Safety is the most often overlooked component for any do-it-yourself project, and I'm frankly surprised that you're actually watching this video. In the second part of the series, we showed you how to choose, size, and wire your batteries. In this part, we're going to show you the things that you should be concerned with when making your battery box. The battery box is all about safety. In my case, I've got over 5 kilowatts of energy stored in that box, enough to light this light bulb for over 700 hours. The point of enclosing batteries is to avoid having all 5 kilowatt hours from discharging at once, in spectacular fashion. When working with batteries, we have lots of point of access to the power, or terminals, and we really want to avoid something shorting them or touching a positive and negative terminal at the same time. If that were to happen, you can melt a screwdriver in half in an instant, or heat a wrench red hot, hot enough to melt through the battery case, start a fire, and get acid everywhere. In short, your battery box is to keep accidents and prying hands away from causing big troubles. I use plywood for my box, but you could use virtually any non-conductive material you want. I've seen people use old furniture and even plastic totes. The point is the non-conductive material. One of the major drawbacks of using flooded lead-acid batteries is they create hydrogen gas when charging. And anybody that's familiar with the Hindenburg knows what happens when hydrogen gas and a spark find themselves in the same room. Luckily, the same principle that lifted the Hindenburg into the air is the same one that's going to keep our battery box safe. Hydrogen, being the lightest element, rises. So if you give it a path to rise, you won't blow up your box. In our case, we drilled a 2-inch hole in the side of the box and ran a 2-inch piece of PVC to the outside. This should create a path for the hydrogen to harmlessly escape. If you have a larger system, you may also want to consider installing a small fan to help the process. Also, on my battery box, I've installed a voltmeter. When the batteries are neither being charged or under load, the meter will tell you the approximate charge state of the batteries. I got this simple meter off of Amazon, and there's a link below in the description. It's wired into the positive and negative terminals with a fuse on the positive leg. There's a link below to a chart that will show you how to translate the battery voltage to the percentage that's charged. Now, it's not the best idea to keep flooded lead-acid batteries in the house, but if you live in a northern climate, you're going to have to find a way to keep your batteries warm. Batteries will lose efficiency as the temperature drops, and they'll become downright useless in the dead of winter if they're kept outside. And you can pretty much forget about using the power you're generating in a system of this size to heat the batteries, because you're going to need more than you generate. The two major things that you're trying to accomplish with the battery box is to keep the batteries isolated from accidents and mishaps and vent the hydrogen to the outside to avoid a hydrogen explosion. Once you've taken care of that, then you can begin to look at other aspects of safety in the system.
Did somebody say safety?
We're dealing with a lot of power here, enough power to injure or kill someone. If the Schumer hits the rotary oscillator and your house catches fire because of your solar system and your lack of safety, what then? Personal and property protection are one thing, but employing safety measures can keep your system running as well. What happens when lightning strikes nearby? Instead of blowing up equipment, you can send that extra energy where it should be going, to ground instead. The first step in making your solar system safe is making sure that there's an automatic and a manual way to disconnect power in each segment of the system. Starting right here at the battery box, we have a 300 amp manual switch to kill the power from the batteries to the inverter, as well as a 200 amp fuse that will blow automatically if something were to short in the inverter. At the solar panels themselves, you need a method to kill the power manually. In this case, I used an outdoor box normally used for something like a spa. It has lugs to land the wires from the panels, as well as a spot for a breaker. In this case, I'm using the breaker as a switch and a fuse for automatic protection. The wire runs into the house and lands at another box, usually used as an air conditioner disconnect. Here I can disconnect the power to service the equipment indoors. Once the power hits the charge controller, there's another fuse between it and the batteries. Once at the batteries, we get to the previously mentioned 300 amp switch and fuse. Just like our video on wiring solar panels, when you choose each component, it's going to have to be rated for the amperage in the environment that it's installed. For instance, the 300 amp switch. It should never see 300 amps because there's a 200 amp fuse that'll blow before it does. With fuses, you're going to have to determine the proper amperage for each leg of your system. For instance, in my system, from the panels to the charge controller, I have 75 volts and 5 amps, so I chose a 10 amp fuse. But once it hits the charge controller, the voltage goes down and the amperage can go up to about 20, so I put in a 30 amp fuse. Now, unless you copy our system exactly, you're going to have different results. Following these suggestions will probably keep your house from burning down, but there's still one more component to the safety and longevity of your system, and that is grounding. As preppers, we want our systems to work if they're ever called upon. And if there's ever a malfunction in one of the components, or say lightning struck nearby, that stray voltage has to go somewhere. That somewhere might be your body if you touch one of the charged components, or other components in the system. Luckily for us, electricity is as lazy as my brother-in-law. It will always follow the path of least resistance. So what do you do to get rid of stray electricity? You give it the path of least resistance. Instead of allowing this errant voltage to find a path through good components or through a person, you're building a highway for these lazy electrons, and they can't resist it. Grounding your system is quite easy. To do so, get an 8-foot grounding rod and drive it into the ground. Then pick up some copper grounding wire, some lugs, and connect the frames of all the panels and any metal components in the system. In my case, this included the disconnect, charge controller, and inverter. One thing that you have to understand about electricity is, although it's lazy, it's always on the move and it's always going to find ground. So if this component becomes charged and I touch it, and I'm touching the ground, the electricity is going to travel through me. If, however, there's an easier path to ground, such as through this lug and out to the grounding rod, it's going to choose that way. Grounding is a must that will increase the chances that both you and your system will survive the apocalypse. And comparatively speaking, it's the least expensive component in the system, so don't overlook it. So, the grid went down. You woke up one day, no power, no cell phones, no internet. Once communications are lost, you might never know what happened. You're simply thrust into a new world, bewildered. In my case, I know what happened, but more on that later. The important part is the grid went down and you had the forethought to generate your own power. My opening statement in the series was that you don't need electricity to survive, and that is true. But there's certain things that you cannot do without it. In the first video in the series, we talked about understanding solar power as money and your system the bank. You can never spend more than you make. And in a grid down scenario, this could never be more true. We explain all the basic rules, and if you missed it, there's some links below. Even with those basic rules, there's a few nuances you're going to want to be aware of. Everybody's electrical loads are going to be different, and you should have sized your system accordingly. Our example was a chest freezer that's going to run continuously. Yours may be different. It's in the extra power that you generate above these loads where things get interesting. The most interesting thing I've found so far living with solar power is how much energy is potentially wasted. If you sized your system larger than your continuous loads, then there's going to come a point on most sunny days where your batteries are fully charged. From there on out, even if there's hours of sunlight left, there's no place for that power to go, and it's wasted. In a grid down scenario, you're going to find yourself making it a point to spend that power in the late afternoon. For folks who prepared, late afternoon might be a time to run the vacuum cleaner, wash a load of dishes, or wash a load of clothes. You might even consider charging the neighbors a can of beans to watch a DVD. The point is, on some sunny days, you're going to have power to spare, and you're going to have to spend it right at that moment. Speaking of sunny days, it'd be nice to know when those are going to happen, wouldn't it? But it's grid down and there's no weatherman. Or is there? I don't give up quite easily, and I found 2 solutions that are going to help me spend my power when the grid goes down. The first is this Accurite weather station. At 3 watts, I can afford to spend the power on a device that can give me a good estimate of tomorrow's weather. It's reasonably accurate and can help me in my decision on whether to spend a large amount of power today or wait. The transmitter runs 2 years on a set of lithium batteries, so I figure I might get decent weather prediction at a very low power cost for quite a few years to come. If that isn't enough, there's another really cool option for predicting the weather if the grid goes down, at least for a couple years anyway. If you want to see what the weather's like across the country, or if you want to see if there's any big storms approaching, with this $25 USB device and this homemade antenna, you can download weather data directly from satellites. As long as the grid wasn't brought down by an EMP or a CME, in which case you'd have bigger problems, weather satellites should be at your disposal for some time. More on this in a future video. Earlier I mentioned I knew why the grid went down, and I know why the grid went down because I'm a ham radio operator. Without electricity, instant communications are impossible. A solar backup for communications was one of the essential reasons for my system. Luckily for you, if you join both clubs, amateur radio and solar power that is, you'll find yourself in great company. There are more than enough of us to get the word out in a disaster, and a great deal of us also utilize renewable energy as a backup source of power for communications. Even if you don't want to become a licensed amateur radio operator, we're going to show you in a future video how you can inexpensively listen to the same things that we do. I've spent the entire series talking about things that you can do with this system, but there's going to be some things that you'll no longer be able to do. Some of those things include heating anything with electricity. While you might get away with heating up some leftovers in a microwave or making a pot of coffee, heating anything else is a complete waste. Using electricity for heating is a waste now, let alone in a grid down scenario. I can run tons of gear with my system, but if I run a space heater for anything more than an hour, I'd completely blow out my battery bank. The same is true with air conditioning. While you might be able to treat yourself to a 15-minute blast from a window unit during peak sun hours, 24-hour air conditioning will be a thing of the past. While I can't continue my normal usage with this grid down system, I can complete most of the tasks to continue a semblance of the day when power was limitless. It just takes some careful power use planning. On cloudy stretches, it might also mean going without for a bit. And besides, I have a guilty conscience. I like to show you guys things that use electricity. So there you have it. It's been a year since the Off-Grid Solar Series, and I'm happy to say that the system has worked pretty much flawlessly. All the links mentioned in the video can be accessed via the link in the description below to the Tin Hat Ranch's Ultimate Guide to Off-Grid Solar Power. Solar power is an integral component to continuing life with a modern semblance of convenience, and this for sure won't be the last of our videos on solar. In fact, be sure to stay tuned and subscribe to the Tin Hat Ranch, if you haven't already, as we have some new series in the works, one of which will give you a look at the Lycan Power Box. It's a new product from Renogy that's going to revolutionize parts of what you just looked at. In short, imagine a box that contains all the components minus the panels in a system. That's the charge controller, inverter, and a 900 watt-hour battery in a portable package that weighs less than 70 pounds. Check out a preview in the links below, and thanks for watching. If you found this information insightful, drop us a comment, hit the like button below, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the Tin Hat Ranch channel. Thanks for watching.